Torture devices have been in existence for centuries and will likely continue to be around in some capacity for many years to come. Some of the most grotesque forms of torture took place in the not-so-distant past. The medieval period is notorious for implementing a few of these unthinkable devices during its time. One such device, known as the Judas Cradle, was most commonly used towards the end of medieval times. Victims of this means of torture were subjected to agonizing pain that would leave them maimed and oftentimes would die as a result of their injuries. This torture device lives on within our history books and continues to remind us of the unspeakable horrors that our species is capable of. The Judas Cradle, invented in 16th century Spain, was primarily a tool used against heretics as well as political opponents. This cradle was a wooden or metal pyramid-shaped seat on which the victim was placed on top. The victim's hands and legs were subsequently bound in order to keep their weight from shifting. From here, the person would be suspended just above the device, where the torturer would have full control of when and how fast the victim would be lowered onto the pyramid-pointed seat. The torturer was often tasked with extracting important information from the subject. As a result, the torture could continue for a few hours to days, making the damage inflicted permanent. As the torturer guided the person down, the tip was inserted into the victim's orifice and/or their genitals. Depending on how the victim would answer the questions, the torturer could manipulate the cradle to inflict maximum pain. If the victim told misinformation, they would be shaken and dropped onto the cradle several times, forcing different ways for the tip of the pyramid to project into the subject. When the person refused to talk, weights would be added to amplify the excruciating pain of the torture. If enough weight was added, the victim would ultimately be impaled. The hypocrisy of it all is that this method of torture was seen as a way of cleansing the Catholic faith from impurities. There is no doubt that the perpetrators received some form of enjoyment from the act. This sadism came in the form of creativity being introduced to the torture, such as thrusting the victim down onto the tip of the cradle repeatedly. The horrifying ways that the victims would succumb to the device is truly nightmare-inducing. Death by the Judas Cradle is one of the more miserable and agonizing ways to die from a time period rich in diverse torture and execution methods. The area where the cradle was to be inserted is sensitive and does not require much force to be damaged. The epithelium of the human anal canal is fundamentally composed of simple columnar epithelium and stratified squamous epithelium. Epithelium, in other words, is the thin tissue forming that outer layer of a body surface. Once the victim was impaled by the tip of the cradle, they would begin to bleed profusely due to the anatomy of the impaled orifice. The arterial blood supply of the anal canal derives from the superior, middle, and inferior rectal arteries, whose branches reach the anal submucosa. When these arteries are ruptured, there is not much stopping the flow of blood other than through corrective surgery. Blood will appear bright red, signifying that an artery has been damaged. From here, the process is relatively straightforward. Once enough blood is lost, the victim will go into what is called hemorrhagic shock. This form of shock is a result of severe blood loss and makes it difficult for blood to deliver oxygen to vital organs in the body. Decreases in circulating blood volume during severe hemorrhage can depress cardiac output and lower organ perfusion pressure. This quickly leads to total organ failure and ultimately death. This process is further sped up with the use of weights, which cause further damage to vessels and arteries, advancing the amount of blood loss. If by some miracle that a victim survives their initial encounter with the Judas Cradle, they would eventually perish from a sepulchral infection. The cradle was never washed or sanitized, following each one of its uses. It would, after all, be redundant to clean this device, when almost everyone subjected to it died from their injuries. There would be not much in terms of effective treatment at the time to deal with the infection. When left untreated, infection can quickly develop into a condition known as sepsis. Severe sepsis can cause organs including the brain, heart, and kidneys to be deprived of blood supply due to inflammatory responses triggered by your body's own defenses. The condition can kill an affected person in as little as 12 hours. The last moments leading up to the victim's death were no doubt excruciating. The brutality associated with this torture method is something derived straight from a horror movie. Only, it was a reality for many unfortunate victims who were forced to endure it.